Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. This is Daniel Uschulin. Welcome to Uschulin.media. Today, our guest is Godfrey Bloom. Well, he's an author, he's a journalist, he's an Austrian school economist, former member of European Parliament, and an all-around magnificent human being, still banned, as you said, on Twitter. And he's joining us from, parts unknown. How are you, sir? Thanks so much for joining us.
A great pleasure to be on and to talk to you again after nearly 10 years.
After nearly 10 years, exactly. So much has happened. So Twitter, let's start with that. I mean, I know it's a stupid thing, but let's touch on that. Why do you think you're still shadow banned on Twitter? Aren't we supposed to be in a kind of an era of freedom of speech with Musk taking over?
I don't know. I can't get to the bottom of it. And I have a technical producer, Patrick, and he's very good and he understands these things. And we can't really get to the bottom of it. I'm totally unaware of technical things. I'm very new to social media, and so consequently I don't understand most of it, but I think it could be that they haven't got round to unshadow banning me yet. Let's be generous to them, that perhaps they haven't unshadow banned me.
A former member of European Parliament. I've watched, I think, every one of your speeches, and I tell you, seeing the faces of those idiots in European Parliament made it all so worth my while. Now, do you miss it?
Well, in some ways, we have a saying in England, which you're probably familiar with in England. Is it good? It's a bit like the curate's egg. It's good in parts. So I enjoyed the platform, and of course my speeches then on fractional reserve banking and that kind of thing. One speech, on all social media, not just Twitter or YouTube, got over 30 million views. So it was very successful having that platform. But do I miss it? No, I'm an old geezer now. I'm an old man. I'm still quite physically fit, but we had to travel. I live in Yorkshire. I have a small holding in Yorkshire. A very, very small holding, and to get to Strasbourg and Brussels was a real pain, and I did it for 10 years. And one day, actually, I got down all the way. I had to go to London to begin the journey. That took 2.5 hours. And one day I had to go, I got on the train and I could see my land from the railway platform with my horses grazing in it, and the sun was shining. And when I got to London, I couldn't bear it. And I got on the train and I came straight back home again, much to the disgust of my wife, who thought she'd got rid of me for at least a week.
And there you are. Hi. Now, the speech you're mentioning, the fractional reserve, that's May 2013, if I'm not mistaken. That was something else. It was awe-inspiring. So can we go through it? Can you tell our audience? So why is the entire banking system a scam?
Well, the problem that we have with fractional reserve banking, which sounds quite complicated, but it isn't. It means that if you put $100,000 into your bank, the bank, under the new rules of Basel III, are only obliged to keep back a small percentage of it, 7, 8, 9% of it. And then they can re-lend it, or worse still, they can speculate with it on derivatives, which is what they do. And I made the point 10 years ago, almost to the day, that this could not continue. The reason that banks have gone down in 2007, 2008 is because they did this kind of thing, and they're still doing it, and the regulations didn't change. And of course, now we're seeing, and I said next time it will happen, it will be happening even on a bigger scale. And that's what we're seeing unfold now. We are seeing that unfold now as you and I are speaking globally, with Credit Suisse, Silicon Valley Bank, and all the smaller banks, which will, the knock-on effect. And the only way the Fed can rescue this, or the ECB, or the Bank of England, is to print money. And the more money they print, the more it becomes degraded. And I'm sure many of your followers and your subscribers will know that when Nixon came off the gold window in 1971, the United States dollar has depreciated against gold by 98%. But it happened so slowly people just think that it's normal, it's got to happen, there's nothing you can do about it. But of course, as the Fed prints money, the Bank of England prints money, and the ECB print money, it degrades money. Who suffers from this? Ordinary working people suffer from the degradation of money, not Bill Gates or George Soros or all these other people. They're multi-billionaires and they have assets. They don't hold their assets in dollar bills, they hold it in land or stocks or all sorts of other things. So they get richer and richer, and ordinary people who get up in the morning to do a real day's job of work, their savings are depleted and their salaries are depleted. And they are beginning now to understand this. They're beginning to understand it. Most people have been very slow to understand why this is happening. But I think they're beginning to wake up. And when they do wake up, there's going to be hell to pay.
Well, you know, again, I think that very slow, I think, is an understatement. We've been drowning in this crisis for over 14 years, longer. But if we take, you know, as the point of reference, the 2007, 2008 crisis, that's 14 years, 15 almost. However, no one seems to know what to do and how to get out of this. So what do we do about this? Because no economist, Western economists, seem to understand. Ladies and gentlemen, so how do we get out of this thing?
Well, the problem that we now have 3 generations of Keynesian economics. And I don't want to sort of be giving a boring lecture on economics, but Keynesian economics is basically that debt doesn't matter, gold is irrelevant, and you can print money. The idea with Keynesianism, I mean, you can print money when you think you need more money, not all the time, to be fair to the Keynesian theory. Then that was mutated into something called modern monetary theory. And modern monetary theory means that debt doesn't matter at all. And this is now 3 generations of faculties in universities across the West and America telling economics undergraduates that it doesn't matter. So now, if you read economics at a university, let us say in the late 1960s, you will believe that modern monetary theory and money printing doesn't matter. You would have to be my age. I'm 73. And that was the mantra when we were all those years ago. So now people believe that to be the case. Our chances of the exchequer, everybody who works for the Fed, the British Treasury, the ECB, the IMF, believe that that's okay, believe that it doesn't matter. But I think, you see, the point is that nobody goes to the barricades with a full tummy. Exactly. This is the problem. Now, people have got a holiday, they've got a car, things aren't that bad at the moment. They're getting bad, they're not nice, but they're not, there isn't mass employment, there isn't mass poverty in the industrial westernized democracies. That's coming. And when they start waking up wondering how did that happen? Why did that come? What's this all about? Then I think you'll find that there will be a very rapid, and it will change in different countries. Now, the French are very much quicker to demonstrate on the streets. Their police are more violent. The French are more used to violent demonstrations. That is something that's extremely un-British. We don't do that. So there'll be some countries that go down that route and some countries that don't go down that particular way of that route. But we'll have to see how it goes. But of course, as you know, and your subscribers will probably know, that we are being tightened down all the time. We are not, and COVID was a wonderful trial run. We were locked down in this country. We couldn't invite people for Christmas lunch. We couldn't go and see grandma. The police became quite thuggish. The British police had a reputation for being very good police force. They turned into uniformed thugs, and the whole thing got very ugly. And here's the weird thing. People went along with it, and a lot of people supported it. Now, I didn't. I didn't get the jab. That was one of the first lies that came out. I didn't wear a mask because anybody with even half an ounce of common sense knows you can't. And then people obeyed it and didn't go and see grandma in the hospital and didn't bring people into Christmas lunch. I built a pub in my small holding. My wife and I built a little pub in the village on my land. And we partied all the way through. We partied all the way through lockdown because we knew. And of course, so did our government, who Boris Johnson's been called out. The government, this is the point that people don't understand. It's not that he broke the rules. People don't get this yet over here. It's not that he broke the rules and had a party. It's the fact that he knew he could have a party because, and that's why he had it, because he didn't care, because he knew it was rubbish. It was a practice run. It was a practice run stimulated by the World Economic Forum to see just how far they could push a democracy or a democratic nation into subservience. And they were very surprised how easy it was.
In a matter of weeks, they, hundreds of thousands of years of people fighting for their freedom, and they took it away in a matter of weeks. 3 weeks, people are locked up. In Spain, in England, in France, in Canada. Canada was horrible. Australia, New Zealand, the world over. So it's easy. I mean, they figured out how easy it is because most people are just too damn stupid or subservient or weak or whatever the problem is. Let me ask you this. So we're in the process of this total economic collapse. This is the same question I asked you 10 years ago. But is this breakup we're seeing today, 14 years later, is it accidental or is it the result of poor planning? Or is it being orchestrated on purpose? And if so, for what reason and by whom?
This is a very difficult question for me to answer because it depends what day you ask me. Sometimes I'm absolutely convinced that it can only be a conspiracy to destroy Western industrial democracies, to rebuild them on a form of fascism. Or sometimes after 10 years in politics, I met a number of senior politicians who are almost incredibly stupid. So I'm not quite sure whether it's stupidity and incompetence, or it is part of a plan. Now, of course, what we are beginning to realize, and I was a bit slow in all fairness to realize this, I hadn't fully realized it 10 years ago, that our politicians do not govern us in the Western democracies. It's nothing to do with them. They all sing off the same hymn sheet. They get their instructions from the World Economic Forum and the oligarchs and names behind the scenes, some of whom we don't even know. We know George Soros, we know about Bill Gates, and we know about some of these people, but there are names with which we are not familiar. I don't know them either. There are people pulling the strings who we don't know, who are going down this route. They are Malthusians. It's quite interesting that members of our royal family and senior members and oligarchs believe there are too many people in the world. Now, here's a fascinating thing. Would you take an injection, which has been invented and sponsored by somebody who thinks there's too many of us? I mean, but you're right. People are stupid. And I made this point on mainstream television only just last week. And I think it's quite fascinating that because I didn't understand this, and I felt I needed to understand it because I'm an economist by profession, but I don't understand why everybody isn't an Austrian school economist. I don't understand that. So I thought I had to do some homework to find out, and it's psychological. So I did the distance learning Smithsonian Institute on psychology to see if I could learn anything from this. Why do people do stupid things? Why do they do that? You know, you scratch your head and you look at why do they do that?
Why do they do stupid things that are not in their self-interest?
Exactly. Now, whether it's right or wrong, and I don't know, it's a psychology course, and it was quite prestigious lectures and so on and so on. But the general feeling was that they were saying was that 30% of people will believe absolutely anything they're told by people in authority. And 40 to 50% of those people will just go with the flow. They don't necessarily believe it, but they just go with the flow because they think that's an easier life.
Resistance. Yeah, it's just easier this way. Yeah.
And the point is, there's only about 15% of the population in the Western democracies in North America, so they say, and I wouldn't dispute it. that actually stand up and say, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to be told if I can have my sister for Christmas lunch. I'm simply not doing that. I'm not going to be told what I can do. I won't wear a mask. And I just didn't do anything. Now, it's easier for me, really, because I live in a very rural community. And I'm quite well known in my small community. And nobody would dare tell me what to do. But of course, if you're living in a big city with thugs with batons and crash helmets, it isn't so easy. But I was stunned when you saw some of those pictures in Victoria in Australia of those thuggish policemen beating women up
Don't forget
because they didn't wear a mask.
Don't forget Canada, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Quebec City.
Yes, but it seemed to me, and I didn't watch all of it, that it seemed that the police behavior was particularly bad in Victoria, Australia. I'm quite sure it was as bad elsewhere. I didn't see those clips, but I can tell you one thing. I'm quite an old man now, but I used to box in the army and I'm still physically fit. I could no more stand and watch a policeman beat a woman up than fly to the moon. I'd have been off there like a rabbit and probably got beaten up myself. But until we all go to the aid of women getting beaten up by police, there should have been other young Australian men there stopping that kind of behavior. How could you call yourself a man watching that happen and not doing anything? Disgusting.
Because these people don't believe in anything. There's no values. They're not willing to sacrifice themselves for the greater good. It doesn't matter if you're in Canada, if you're in Australia. There's an interview, I can't remember the chap's name, but he was interviewing people in the streets of London the other day. And he was asking people, again, I don't remember the question, but it's irrelevant. And everybody was saying, well, I think, and I thought to myself, if you kind of stop the camera and you realize what this individual is saying, they're not saying I think, they're saying I feel. And feelings are, well, they're irresistible. You can't debate them. They're my feelings. But thinking is something very different. To think, to ponder, you have to read, you have to think, you have to actually understand how things work. You have to read, you have to school yourself on a subject, which means that most people, are going to replace thinking with feelings, because feelings is a touchy-feely kind of thing. It's much easier. And so what the people are saying is, I feel, and again, when you're feeling, and you're seeing it globally today, there's no values, because nobody is willing to give their life up for something else, for greater good, for a greater purpose, as our forefathers used to do in the past. Let me ask you something else. We have nation states, countries, today being replaced by this one world company limited. Corporations with more power than any government on the planet. We can talk about BlackRock, we can talk about all kinds of different companies. Now, how will this end if we extrapolate this into the future?
Well, it's very difficult again to say, because different countries have different responses, and people, generally speaking, historically, people have behaved of different countries in a different way. So you have the Mediterranean temperament, you have the Latin temperament, where they are, quick to flare up, the Latin temperament, and countries even like not necessarily Italy or Spain or Greece. The Poles have a very Latin temperament. I'm married into a Polish family, and they're very.
Your father-in-law is. I remember one of your lectures, I think in Oxford. Yeah.
Yes. My father-in-law was Polish. Came in here after the war. Was a tank commander. Made himself a millionaire. Worked extremely hard. Was a complete Anglophile, but he was very, he could get excited. He would get excited. The British tend to not get so excited so quickly, so everybody would react in their own way. How it's actually and some people, you see, if you let's go back to fascism, for example, and I don't use fascism in a pejorative term, which is what silly young students shout fascist at people without even understanding what the concept is. Fascism, it was a very popular form of government in Europe. It didn't suit the British. It doesn't go with the British personality, but it does go with some European countries like the idea of fascism, because they actually like firm government. They like to be told what to do. They have a legal system, the Napoleonic Code, or Corpus Juris, which tells you, and this is the thing that's very difficult for some people to understand, is that Corpus Juris, it tells you what you can do. Now, the system of Anglo-Saxon common law tells you what you can't do. And that's a huge difference, which some people don't seem to be able to grasp. So if you are coming from a legal system, as they are in Europe, the Napoleonic Code, they're used to being told what they can do. Whereas an Englishman like me would be say, I can do anything I like, as long as it's not against the law. And if it's a silly law, don't expect me to obey it. These are two fundamentally different things. And we're talking, certainly in England, we're talking, and this is pre-Magna Carta. Magna Carta was 1215. We're going beyond that. We're going to common law in the Anglo-Saxon world of 800 AD, 900 of Alfred the Great. We're going right back. So we're going back over 1,000 years. Go back 1,000 years with this kind of legal system. And the French, okay, you might argue, go back to the Napoleonic Code, obviously only a few hundred years ago. It was fairly firmly built on corpus juris. And so we have two different legal systems. And of course, the Russians, for example, the Russians, with their history, tend to prefer a firm government. You know, they respond to a firm government. That doesn't mean to say it's a first person. So they want Russia's like a firm government. That doesn't mean an unfair government or a tyrannical government. It's the same in Singapore, which is an extremely successful economy, but you don't put your chewing gum on the floor, and you certainly don't make a fuss. You don't get into a fight in a bar because they clamp down on that kind of thing. Now we have a very crazy system at the moment in Great Britain, where you now can't do anything at all. You can't say anything. And we had somebody the other day arrested for praying silently. She was near an abortion clinic, and she was a Christian.
I saw
and
that.
She was praying silently and was arrested and charged. This is something that in East Germany they didn't do in the 1950s and early 60s. The East German, the Stasi police wouldn't have done that. And here we are, Great Britain, where you can arrest somebody for praying silently. And here's the interesting thing. Had she been a Muslim, she wouldn't have been arrested.
Obviously.
So we're living with all the authoritarian tyranny that goes with totalitarianism, whether it's fascism or communism, but we're not getting any of the protection. We still have crime, we still have litter, we still have all the bad things that Singapore don't have. I mean, some people say, like, I'll give up this, this, and this. If there's no burglary, there's no rape, and we live in an ordered society. That's the trade-off for living in a tyrannical regime. But to get the worst of both worlds, which we now have in Great Britain, is quite extraordinary. And worse, there is no opposition. Her Majesty's opposition. We don't have one group of politicians in the Labour Party saying this is terrible, we need to do something else. Or they're all the same. They're all at Davos. They're all WEF stooges. Even the King, King Charles III, is a WEF stooge. The Prince of Wales now, William, is a WEF stooge. And people are going, and I have 150,000 subscribers, and they ask me all the time in one social medium or another, and they're all saying the same thing. What do we do? I wish I had an easy answer.
Let me ask you this, speaking of can and cannot do's, in Belgium, children are being indoctrinated into anal sex, children. And the same could be said for Canada, for France, for Spain. In Spain, whereas I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, they passed a law allowing people to have sex with animals. So we extrapolate this into the near future, and then you compare it to some of the other societies. You say to yourself, you know, is this the Garden of Eden that Joseph Borrell professed Europe to be?
Well, if I may use an historical analogy, as I think perhaps is apposite, and that is, if you think about ancient Rome, I think is your best benchmark. Ancient Rome degraded to the point that they threw their own gates open to the Goths and the Huns because things had got so bad. And if you look at exactly why they'd got so bad, why did Rome fall? What was wrong with the Roman Empire? There were a number of things, but the two fundamental reasons that the Roman Empire collapsed, they degraded their currency, their silver currency, the denarius. They degraded their currency, and they couldn't protect their borders. There were the two fundamental pillars of the collapse of the Roman Empire. And we have the same thing now in Western Europe, and it's now happening in North America. The currency is being degraded before our eyes, and neither America nor Western Europe can control the invasion from Africa and other parts of the world. And therefore, it means your civilization must collapse, the civilization as we know it. And here's the interesting thing, I think, historically, unless you can put me right on this, what tends to happen is when you get a collapse of a civilization, people don't say that the politicians created this, the monarchy created this when it collapses. They then say, not this is the government's fault. They say, we didn't have enough government, or the government wasn't strong enough. And if you look at the French, the collapse of the French monarchy, they had the terror, they had a few years of unimaginable horror. And what did they turn back to? They turned back to Emperor Napoleon, who made all his family princes and kings, conscription, built a big army, and invaded everywhere else. And the same thing in Russia in 1917. They wanted a revolution. They wanted to be more westernized. They wanted some form of liberal democracy under Kerensky in 1917. What did they ended up? They ended up with Stalin.
Well, because you had two revolutions. You had the February Revolution, that was the liberal Western Revolution, and you had the October Revolution, which was the revolution of Lenin and Trotsky. Let me ask you something else. Speaking of politics in UK, Nigel Farage, your old UKIP buddy from European Parliament. I know that didn't end very well, but is Nigel still a force in well, no longer in Europe, obviously, but in British politics?
Not really, no. He could have been. He could have been if he had metamorphosed the UK Independence Party, of which I was a member. If he could have changed that into a potential political party of government, if he could have done that from a political group of dissidents, if you will, or a sort of a protest group, but he didn't know how to do that. He didn't have the experience to do that.
Yeah, because in the end, the UKIP was, you guys were against being part of the European Union, but what were you for? And when that came about, and England left with Brexit, I think the whole thing just fizzled out. And I totally agree with you that Nigel could very well have been the force, but he just didn't have. I don't know if it's the experience or the ideas, or maybe the people around him. Because again, also you have to be working with a team. Maybe he didn't have the people to actually get this done on on a local, national level.
That is certainly possible, but of course he chose the team. The team was his. It wasn't magic. It was a totally autocracy in UKIP. And I'm not saying that's wrong or right. And Nigel did a lot of good work. And I'm not having a go at Nigel, but we're having a discussion on why something didn't happen.
Exactly.
And the other thing is, of course, Nigel is a conservative. He really would like to have been a Brexit Conservative Party politician. He's not an Austrian school economist. He's not a libertarian. We started off at UKIP libertarian. Nigel wasn't comfortable with any radical economical thinking or any radical social, and the time then was crying out, and this is why we departed. We fell out. We fell out politically. We didn't fall out personally. No problem. Yeah, and if I saw him in the pub, we'd have a pint together. There'd be no problem at all. It was a purely political fallout that I felt we needed a radical party, a libertarian party, to challenge. When we come out of Brexit, we need to challenge what kind of society do we want to build.
Yeah.
And I didn't want just a wishy-washy Conservative Party government out of Brexit. Now, in all fairness, Nigel doesn't want that either, because we haven't taken advantage of Brexit. We don't have Brexit. We don't have it. Yeah, we have a sort of an associate membership. And Nigel's pressing against that. But as a force in politics, no, sadly, we had the chance. and we blew it. We had the chance and we blew it. It's a great problem, a great shame, but there we are, a missed opportunity.
Yeah, it's one of these doors that opens momentarily, and then if you don't take advantage, it shuts. Let me ask you about the another question about England. Now that the Queen is dead, what's going to happen to the monarchy? Because I mean, she was the monarchy.
Well, of course, I remember her coronation in 1953. I'm old enough to remember watching a little television set, and the whole nation is monarchist. It is today. And she had enormous respect from everybody, the Commonwealth, across the world. She had enormous respect. And I held the Queen's Commission in the army. So I have to, I'm a truly and well-beloved friend. I have a piece of paper she signed to say so. Well, now here's the problem. She did abandon her Constitution oath. She signed what she should never have signed. It was against her Constitution and against the 1688 Acts, the Tolerance Act and the Bill of Rights. So she ignored her constitutional responsibilities. And I had lunchtime drinks with the Duke of Edinburgh 10 years ago. And he said to me, and it was in confidence then, but there's no need for confidence now because they're both dead. So, and I will never break a confidence under those circumstances. He told me that she now signs, and I'm going back to 2012, she now signs anything that her ministers put in front of her. Now, here we have the problem. People think the constitutional monarchy is just about her waving from the carriage and opening this and doing. This is not so. This is not true. The British Constitution is quite definitive. And you look at the 1688 Bill of Rights, the Toleration Acts, we have a very specific constitution. It is not written in one document like the American Constitution, but is nonetheless a constitution. She abandoned it, and she was forgiven because she was much loved. And the population, again, is 90% stupid and didn't even know she'd abandoned it, because that's how stupid they are and badly educated. We have a man now, King Charles, who is very happily seen and photographed with Klaus Schwab, the Rothschilds, and all these people on the World Economic Forum platform in Davos, and his son is. Now we're heading for a massive, massive breach of his coronation oath. And there is talk over the moment here as him trying to actually change his coronation oath to fit in with his political views. He is highly politicized. Now that is against the British Constitution. He's not entitled to be politicized, but he is bound to keep up the British Constitution. He's bound to do that. And it looks like he isn't going to do that. He has no interest in that. And he has been for many years. He's bought totally into the climate hoax. He's bought into all these things. And he's talking about even bigger clampdowns than we had in COVID in order to save the planet from this ridiculous nonsense that man-made carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is somehow going to kill us all. So scientifically ludicrous. But then you have to bear in mind, and your people watching, your audience, have to bear in mind, he's another very stupid man. He's a very stupid man. He's an ignorant man. He's deceitful and he's arrogant. And he was deceitful in his marriage, and he's deceitful with the British population. And I think the monarchy will end with him. I think it will end with him because I don't think the Commonwealth will want it. The Canadians won't want it. The Australians, New Zealanders won't want it. And he will be left on his own. And eventually people will say, what's the point in him? He's not popular.
Going back to what we were saying earlier, people are just too stupid. They see a king, oh, this is our king, this is the Commonwealth. And so I think Australians may go, say, see ya. But I think Canadians are going to go along. For the most part, Canadians are not very intelligent people. I've lived in Canada for many, many years. I'm from Toronto, Canada. And unfortunately, I mean, you've seen this with it's tremendous. I mean, in the United States, you had over, I can't remember the number, but I think at least 45 or 53% of the people said no to the to the vaccine, to the shot. I think in Canada, it was like 80 or 85% of the people said, absolutely, it's good for the country. If the prime minister said so, obviously he's thinking of us. In other words, Trudeau, before he goes to bed, he's saying, oh, my fellow Canadians, I love you all so much. I just, I want to help you as much as I can. And one of the things we can do together is to get this stupid vaccine shots so we'll get better. So I think Canada's got to go along, but I totally agree with you. So they may try to save the monarchy by actually getting rid of King Charles and putting his son in his place. Do you think that's a possibility?
His son's just the same. I could show you, and I post them, thousands of pictures of him on the WAF platform as well. He's just a young version of his father.
What about Harry? What about Prince Harry?
I can tell you what the problem was with Harry. And that is, he was again, like the House of Windsor, like all of them in the royal family, the House of Windsor, he's also not very clever, but he had a career in the army, a career which he enjoyed, and I gather was quite a popular officer of middle rank, well, less than middle, he was a captain. He would have been very good. He would have got to major, he would have got to field rank probably, he would never have got higher than that, he was too stupid. But he was popular with everybody, and he was popular with the country. And then the death blow for him came when they were afraid he might get killed in Afghanistan. So they withdrew him from the army and finished his career, and basically said, you can do these token jobs. You're the, and that just broke him because he didn't want to do that. He wanted to stay in the army. And if you bear in mind, he could have had any woman in the world, couldn't he? Prince Harry could have had any woman in the world.
So why did he marry her, Meghan Markle? I mean, why?
How could he have married that woman, who I wouldn't actually employ to do our laundry? How could he marry her? And how did the royal family allow it to happen? They should have said, look, if you want to get married to her, that's fine, if that's what you want to do. But there are no, you're going to be Mr. and Mrs. Harry Windsor. There are no royal titles. There's no nothing. She's not going to be received. We wish you well. That's what they should have done. They made her a royal duchess. And I said on the day of the wedding, it's on my website, I blogged, I said, no good will come of this. She thinks in her very, very tiny brain that she's been elected as a Democratic senator for California. That's what she thinks. She doesn't realize she's the royal duchess, and she still doesn't realize that. And it seems to me that she's spiteful and deceitful and all the rest of it. But then, she's a member of the House of Windsor. Aren't they all awful? They're all dreadful, aren't they?
Well, we
deserve each other.
We got about 5 minutes left. I want to talk to you about the financial crisis. So we have, as you said earlier, we have Silicon Valley Bank, we have Signature Bank, we have First Republic Bank, then we have Credit Suisse. So what's next? Deutsche Bank, and then what? Because Deutsche Bank, is it too big to fail or too big to be saved? So is this the beginning of the end, or is this only the end of the beginning?
Well, if you look at the share price of Deutsche Bank, it's been reduced by 90% in the last 4 years anyway. And they said, oh dear, Deutsche Bank's just fallen by 18% this morning. Well, what about the 90% fall in the last 4 years? No. It's on life support. It's failed. People say, oh, will Deutsche Bank fail? It's already failed. It failed years ago. It's on life support. It's a bit like looking at the unfortunate situation when somebody's been badly smashed in a car crash and they're on a life support system. Their heart's beating, but that doesn't make them alive. But all the banks are the same. And if you look at the ratios of the asset ratios of all the European banks, they're all broke. They're all broke. There aren't any sound brokers. And of course, most banks lend money into bank. And so you can't have one bank that goes down and not the bank next to it. And you get this knock-on effect. And we saw that in 2007. But we're dealing now with nearly 6 or 7 times the amount of debts that we had in 2007. And of course, the other thing that we don't understand, nobody understands, is the exposure to derivatives in shadow banking. And they run into unknown trillions.
I think they run into quadrillions.
Yes, exactly. The numbers that ordinary human beings, including myself, can't comprehend. They're
Quadrillion
like
is
when you
15 zeros, by the way. Quadrillion is a number plus 15 zeros.
well, to the human mind, it's a little bit like when you watch these programs on outer space,
Yes.
and they say we found a new galaxy, and you're going, I can just about imagine where Hawaii is if I
Yeah,
get on the
it's
plane.
657 billion light years away.
Yeah, doesn't mean anything to us, does it? How could it? And then people ask me, they say, well, yeah, but just don't we owe the money to ourselves? This is another, key. Well, you see, who's yourself? And this is what I'm trying to explain to me. It's you say, oh, well, it doesn't matter if we owe this money because we owe it to ourselves. No, what actually happens is we owe it to other people. We owe it to the life insurance companies. We owe it to your pension fund. What do you mean it doesn't matter? What happens when your pension fund turns around and goes, no, I'm sorry, it's crashed?
Well, they all bankrupt. The pension funds are bankrupt. The insurance companies and the entire system is bankrupt.
Yeah, exactly. And the
So-
people in the public sector who have index-linked pension funds over here in this country who have been protected, imagine because they worked for the government and it's a government pension, it won't stop. They imagine that because it's a government pension scheme, that the check will land on the mat forever, which of course is ludicrous. But most people in the Western democracies don't believe a government can go broke. They never get a history book out. Governments go broke a lot. And when they do go, of course, the person who's a retired teacher or civil servant in Britain, they might still get a check arriving on the mat, but it'll be worthless when a pint of beer is £200, or a family car is $1.5 million.
Well, we've seen how that goes. I mean, obviously, globally, Russia beginning in 1991, Weimar Germany in the 1920s. We understand how this goes. Most people, for some strange reason, think it's not going to happen to them. This kind of stuff happens over there. It actually doesn't. It happens here. So how does the story end for the West?
I would need to maybe have another conversation another day, Daniel, and while we can have a little think, because we're now into deep philosophy. This is no longer a financial question. This is nothing to do with economics. This is to do with philosophy and how do we handle this and what would be the best way to handle it. And I think that's a whole nother chapter which we could kick around. I think things are going to get a lot worse. That would be the time to bring it up, I think.
Well, let me ask you one last question and we're done. And I'm definitely going to have you back. Immigration. I saw an interview. Well, actually, it's a presentation you did. It's from a few years back, but I watched it last night, actually. Immigration. Is it still bad for Britain?
Well, the thing is, the headline at the Oxford Union, they said, immigration is bad for Britain. And of course, I never said that. That wasn't the proposition at Oxford. It was quite careful. Too much immigration is bad for Britain. And they're a very different thing. And I made that point at the Oxford Union. Now, the point is that what we have failed to do in Great Britain is work out who are the good guys to bring into the country and who aren't. So what we need to do is look at, let's say, for example, if you're from Eastern Europe or anywhere in Europe or Australia.
If you're from Ukraine, let's say if you're from Ukraine.
Well, let's say that let's say you're from the Ukraine and you're a joiner, a carpenter, an electrical worker, somebody who brings something to the country, and you are of the Christian faith. And I only use that not because I'm a particularly holy Christian, I'm not, but somebody who builds into our ethics, our understanding, the Christian ethos. You don't have to go to church every day. That's got nothing to do with it. Somebody like that, I was just from the Ukraine, is welcome. But some of the people arriving at Dover, and if you look at this thing makes me unpopular on BBC when they used to have me on. If you blow up those photographs, you're dealing with people who are very primitive. They're coming from very primitive societies, and they are very primitive people, and their attitude to women is very rape. Now look at rapes in Sweden. It's already happening here now. We get a rape now every day. Rape was relatively rare in Great Britain. We get a rape now every day, and it's always the same. They're always from the same place. All right. And this is the problem that we have. And until we start admitting this to ourselves, that not all immigration is good and not all immigration is bad, let's select the good guys we want and let's keep the other guys out. We don't want the rape, but we want the people of skill.
We're out of time. Godfrey Bloom, thank you so much for joining us. Before we go, I would very much like for people to follow your work. So how can they follow what you do?
Well, that's very kind of you. Very easy. Everything I do, including this this recording, will be on my website, which is very simple, small case, godfreybloom.uk. godfreybloom.uk, and everything's there, videos, articles, this particularly, and with other people of your sort of background and liberal mindedness and forward thinking experts in their field. It's all there. It's all there. And you won't find anything, you won't find the kind of conversation, of course, we've had here in any of the Western mainstream media.
God forbid. God forbid. In any case, thanks so much for joining us. Definitely going to have you back. We have a lot of other things to talk about. Thanks again. Take care.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I'll automatically share it with you. So, surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.